Hello, everybody. Good evening. My goodness, standing room only. What a fantastic turnout. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kim Heil. I'm the Interim Associate Artistic Director here at the Old Globe. And I'm so happy to see all your wonderful smiling faces to join us in this conversation. We have a special guest up here with me today, so I'm going to say a few nice things about her before she gets to talk. Mary Zimmerman is the recipient of the 1998 MacArthur Genius Fellowship. She won the 2002 Tony Award for Best Director of a Play for Metamorphoses and numerous Jeff Awards, and Jeff Awards are like the Chicago Tony Award. She is an artistic associate of Goodman Theater, where over the past 25 years, she has directed over 17 productions, including her own adaptations of Candide, The Jungle Book, White Snake, which we saw here several years ago, Mirror of the Invisible World, The Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, Journey to the West, and The Odyssey, as well as directed The Music Man, Wonderful Town, All's Well That Ends Well, The Trojan Women, Pericles, and Silk. Many of these productions, as well as her Arabian Nights, Argonautica, The Secret of the Wings, Treasure Island, and The 11 Rooms of Proust, have played across the country and internationally. She is a professor of performance studies at Northwestern University and an ensemble member at Looking Glass Theater Company. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Mary Zimmerman.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So Mary is the director and the adapter of the show that I'm assuming you are all here to see tonight, The Notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, or maybe you saw it over the weekend. We're so happy you're back, Mary. And as you heard, there was some applause. Some folks saw White Snake back in, we think it was 2015.
We're unsure. Yeah, 14 or 15.
2014 to 2015. Yes, and that was fabulous. We're so excited to have you back, Mary. I have a few questions, and I'll start off by saying I told this story actually at our meet and greet. At the beginning of every rehearsal process, we have a meet and greet where we introduce the Globe to the actors and the cast and creative team. And so back in 2001, I think it was, or maybe 2002, I was a graduate student of performance studies in NYU. And I was actually studying directing, and it was one of my courses. And for my thesis, I had to select a director and that I was going to write about. And I had just seen Metamorphoses, and I thought, my gosh, if I can get on the phone with Mary Zimmerman, I would die. Just like that. Just like that. You know, as an overeager grad student. And I thought, she'll never answer my email. And I don't know how I got your email. Oh, I guess you were on the Northwestern
At Northwestern,
website.
yeah, it's the
so
same one.
I sent an email, and I thought, she'll never write back. She wrote back. Not only did she write back, she said, I'd love to talk. And I thought, oh, my God. So we arranged a phone call, and I got to know more about this amazing artist. And since then, I've just been in awe of her work. And Notebooks will be the fourth show that I've seen of yours. And the very first show I saw was Arabian Nights in Los Angeles. When Looking Glass brought it there. And even then, I was like, what's happening? This is amazing.
A long time ago.
I'd never seen anything like it. And then, of course, Metamorphoses was mind-blowing. White Snake. And then now this. So anyway, I just wanted to say it's really an honor to be sitting next to you.
Thank you. I'm glad I answered the phone.
So speaking of graduate school,
yes.
Notebooks actually came out of your graduate school experience. So tell us a little bit about that. That was, it premiered in '93, but it sounds like you've been working on it.
Well, yeah, the prototype of it had virtually no set. It was done in a room smaller than this. But it's important in my life in that it's the very first thing I ever did off campus. And I produced it myself. And I called my dad and I had $800 worth of stock that he, bought when I was little, and now it's worth $800. And I told him to sell it, and he said, there's this thing called a margin account, so why don't you borrow against it, and the interest will repay, which I did. And that interest only paid back the $800 like 10 years ago, because it's like $1.20 a year or something. So I took the $800, and I just had this idea. I had done a little piece at school, and I wanted some scientific text about the eye or about sight. And I remembered having seen on PBS when I was a kid, Civilization with Lord Kenneth Clark. And I remembered like a sepia-colored piece of paper and some profiles of men with like these lines radiate. I just remembered that. So I went to the University Library at Northwestern, and to my amazement, there was 2 shelves of Leonardo's writing. And at that time, we knew he wrote backwards, that about it, but you don't really I didn't understand how much written work he produced, because he didn't really intend it largely for publication. The stuff that was written sort of for publication, he never bothered in his lifetime. But I thought it was super beautifully written. And I just thought I could make a piece out of it. It felt like it had a kind of performative and metaphoric content to it at times. And I just felt I could stage it. So I was still in grad school, and I rented this space downtown, and it was fateful because who I rented it from was this brand new little theater company called Looking Glass, which was made up of Northwestern undergraduates, but I didn't really know them at school. I was a graduate. And that was in a way the beginning of my relationship with them, and that's been a very fruitful, close relationship, in my life since then.
Yeah. So tell us about what that production was like. If it was in a room, did you have 8 actors? Did you have sets?
I definitely had, I think maybe not 8, but 5, and it was men and women, and they were all Leonardo. And I would say 60% of the text at least was the same, but it did not have much of a set, but there was a little effect where we pulled some strings up on these slats during a section. But the big leap the production took is when it became a professional production at the Goodman Studio, and when Scott Bradley became my set designer. And if you've seen it or when you see it, you'll understand how important the set is to it. The set is everything. And, sets have to be designed and built sort of I don't write my plays until I'm in rehearsal. It's a whole different topic, but I don't. And I could write into the set that Scott had created. Like, if there's this in those drawers, or if these drawers can do that, that prompts me to include a section that can use that. It's the same with Metamorphoses. I conceived it to be in a pool of water, and then I picked stories and myths that could take advantage of the fact that it's in water, that water is metaphoric or used poetically in the story or is important in a story. It's the same thing. I get to write into the people I have and the set I have, which has to be decided and starting to be built before you're in rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the people that you have, and one of the things that I remember you telling me when I was writing about you was that you create with your actors' abilities in mind, and in particular, I remember you mentioning there was an actress in Metamorphoses who melted into the water, and there was something she could do that you were like, oh my gosh, no one else has done this before, and she would disappear into the water.
Yes.
And so then that woman did do that.
Yes.
For that, and I'm wondering what happens to the next cast. They now have to do that.
It's absolutely true. Well, I'll tell you something. Every time we do Leonardo, one thing that's different is the assigning of the tracks. So actor A might not do all the things that actor A did in the 10 years ago production, 20 years ago. I'll mix all of that up. One actor in this production, Chris Donahue, was not in that prototype one, but he was in the very first professional one, and he's been in it for 30 years. But even he is not, he's doing some new things, and he's not doing some things he did, because I just redistributed a little bit differently depending on who's in it. And like if someone can sing, then there's a song, or if someone's, there's a section that's kind of, if I had to say there's a kind of noted section in this show, it comes only about 10 or 12 minutes in, which is a section on weight. And that was made only because of the particular height-weight differential between these two actors and their extraordinary physical skill and what they could do. And then you're absolutely right, casting my shows down the line, because I've cut them so particularly, the cloth, I fitted the cloth of the suit to the actor so particularly, I do sometimes really struggle to recast. And that's how come partly also tracks get rejiggered a little bit, because they can do this, but they can't quite do that. Yeah.
So when you come to your first rehearsal, like let's say with Notebooks, you said you don't write until you're in rehearsal, but you have the text at least. So how do you make all of that come together?
I have the original source text. This couldn't be done. I'm not just making up the stories. All of my shows are adaptations. So I have the source text. But it's true that all of my plays, except for one, are made. I have to write some scenes for auditions, and they always end up being overwritten. So I give the actor a lot to do. And then when I come up to that scene in the rehearsal process, they never fit right, and they're always a problem scene, and I always have to cut them to smithereens. But so say I'm doing the Odyssey, I will the original time. I'll cast, the Penelope and the Odysseus and the Telemachus, and everyone has a named part. But then I'm writing it the night before, one scene at a time. Or Metamorphoses, I have to make up the structure, and this I have to make up the structure, right? The Odyssey has one of the most beautiful literary structures that was ever done. Sort of starts in the middle, and then the middle section is a flashback, and then it goes back to the present. But I'm sort of feeling my way through the structure of the thing. And so, we're just working on little sections, or Metamorphoses, I might not have been certain where this story was going to go next to which. Or Arabian Nights is the same thing. There's 400 stories. So I'm picking the stories, partly depending on who's in the cast, and then just emotionally and rhythmically figuring out that arc for an evening. But I write the night before, often in the early hours, and bring it in. It's not that we improvise and then I type it up that night. It is the same process as playwriting, but the time frame that I'm doing it is superimposed on the time frame of rehearsal. And we don't use extra time for rehearsal. It's just the 4 weeks like it always is.
Oof.
So it's kind of a gauntlet, that's thrown down.
Yeah. You create this incredible visual language, certainly with your actors' bodies, right, and the shapes that they make. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the set as well, and I often wonder, okay, so you imagine, let's say with Metamorphoses, you imagine the pool, and then you sort of built around the pool. Now with Notebooks, I have questions like, so did that drawer open because you decided it needed to open mid-rehearsal, or did you always know that was going to open? Those are the kinds of questions that I have.
It's a long time ago, but mostly I remember with Scott, when we were working on the set as it is now, I had said floor-to-ceiling file cabinets, which contain a lot of tricks as well as the props and things like that. And then he very far exceeded what I had imagined. But I with my designers, I have to talk, just a huge amount of talking because there isn't a set script. But I will tell you one little discovery, which is there's a couple repeated passages that we refer to that we kind of hang the structure of the thing on. And they're the two quite poignant or provocative personal passages in the Notebooks. And one is Leonardo's, what he claims is his earliest memory. It's so spectacular that it's hard to believe that it actually happened, but he claims it. And then another from childhood where he came across a great cave in the foothills above his town and was sort of poised on the threshold of it, afraid to go inside, but held there by fascination. And this cave image, I knew we were going to repeat it. It was so interesting to me, and it felt to me that there's something about death in that cave, it's only when we it's only when we die that we truly cross into the unknown and find out, right? And it wasn't until we were on the set that suddenly one of the sections of the wall has these 16 long small drawers that sit in a kind of square. And part of the process of the play is most of the drawers get opened or pulled out or used and kind of go away. And when those 16 were gone, suddenly there was like the cave was there. And that was not in any way planned. And then like right below it were these sort of steps up to it. And there was no plan that, and I don't want to, spoiler alert, but that Leonardo was going to disappear into this cave, but suddenly there it was. And I have a very strong belief in the unconscious. And
Yes.
That's where, like, if you're working really well with your collaborators and you're on the same page, these accidents will happen, right? They will happen because something buried is coming forward, that you're sharing and understanding.
Yeah, some would call that magic.
Maybe it is magic, but all I can say is it wasn't planned, and then there it was, absolutely perfectly there.
So
Cool.
Let's go back to your concept of these notebooks and the fact that you've named all of your actors Leonardo.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's you talk about this in the program actually about Leonardo's. What drew you to his writing was his sort of infinite curiosity about the universe.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about how that relates to these 8 actors all playing Leonardo.
Well, the breadth of his interest in the world is unparalleled. And a thing that I say a lot about him when I'm asked is it's very common to think of Leonardo as like he just was barely a human being. His brain was just so big he wasn't like us. And I don't believe that, nor do I need to pathologize him, that he had some obsessive compulsive, or any of that. I feel that what the genius of Leonardo that is rare is his ability to stay awake to the world. When we're little, we have all kinds of wonder and fascination at every little thing. And we ask questions like, why is the water in the ocean blue, but in my bathtub it's clear? And then at a certain point, we just kind of go, oh, I don't know. Like, too hard. I can't figure it. It's hard. I don't know. Or we get kind of just habituated to it and forget about it, right? We just forget about it. We see trees all day. We hear birds all day. The sun comes up every morning. We just get habituated. He did not, and that's what's astonishing. That till the last day of his life, he was still trying to figure it all out, and his desire to sort of figure it all out was so enormous that he employed the 2 main strategies for that task in life: artistic and scientific, both. And if he'd just been a painter and accomplished what he accomplished, which is a lot, again, painting since Leonardo looks like Leonardo, so we don't notice classical European painting. But if you look at paintings of his contemporaries next to him or just before him, it's a different story. So if he'd just done painting, that might be enough. And if he just had his scientific explorations and discoveries and observations, which were astonishingly astute. And one of them, in fact, Anatomists made fun of this for years, and then in 1967 he was proven right about a certain valve in the heart. And by the way he did this experiment, everyone said that something like when the blood goes out of the heart, the muscle contracts behind it so that it can't backwash in. And he thought that's not it. And he took the heart of an ox, made a glass model of it somehow, and then he took some kind of seed, filled it with water, and put seed in it so he could see the motion of the water and to see what it would do. And he feels it's this flap that actually, through the suction of the muscle of the heart, closes off that valve. It's not a constriction of the muscle. Anyway, and then in 1967 they went, okay, yeah, he was right. And he was wrong about a lot of stuff too. Don't get me wrong, but it seems to me that, and this wasn't a conscious choice, but this thing never presented itself in my imagination as like a one-person show. I felt, and it has a kind of great effect because Leonardo just kind of keeps refreshing himself. You know, when you watch the show, it's like, and this is also him, and this is also him, and this is also him. And it brings me back to what I was saying about, like, it's not that he wasn't human and had such a big brain. I think we all have Leonardo-ness in us. And whenever you, like, notice something in the natural world, like you just stop and you notice, like, in my case, it's things like in Chicago, at the first snow, the light in the house and the air becomes kind of radiant because there's so much bounce of the light off that blanket of white snow, and it changes it. Or if you notice the bird song, or you notice the way the leaves are, you know, overlapping and make kind of double shadows on the grass, or all this sort of thing, that's the Leonardo in you, and it is in you. It's just that his particular genius was that he just didn't get bored. You know, he didn't get habituated, and he didn't get bored, and he was tenacious. That's another part of his genius, is just like this doggedness too.
But you must have curated, right? Like,
oh, sure.
Like you went through and decided this can be theatricalized. So what was your process of deciding what you could actually put on stage?
I mean, honestly, it's the same with everything I adapt. It's like, do I have an idea for how to stage this? That's how the myths and metamorphoses got chosen, or the particular stories in Arabian Nights. It's like, oh, I know how to do. I have an image of how to do that. Or it felt to me, there are passages. The passages that first drew me in a way were the ones that feel like they're saying more than they're saying, and so. In one passage, he's justifying anatomical, both autopsy and anatomical drawing, which he's sort of credited with inventing the drawing of anatomy. Before that, it was just sort of prose description. And but he was an artist, so he could draw. And in a kind of justification for drawing, as opposed to just prose, and I'm going to screw this up, you'll hear it tonight, but it's, for with what words could we describe this human heart? The more you try, the more it will elude you. And the more you write about it, the more you will confuse the heart, the hearer who must go back to experience. And this with you is very brief and delves in only a small part of the subject of which you desire complete knowledge. So, I mean, obviously, it feels like he's not just talking anatomically about the heart, but the vagaries of the human heart and our desires and so forth. And there's a lot of passages like that they're so poetic if you hear them right. And they're super abundant to what they're describing. They're just beautiful. I just find them beautiful. So I had an idea sort of to bring that out. At other times, I'm slightly, respectfully, kind of making fun of him, because there's a passage called The Spirit and the Voice, wishing to prove whether the spirit has a voice or no. And actually, this was an argument against kind of a cult thought, right? That ghosts were speaking or spirits could speak. And he really, whatever Dan Brown might want to say, he was not a cult-oriented at all. He was a, prove it guy. And so he's talking about how spirits, a ghost, could not possibly speak because there's no body, and in order to speak, you have to have tenuous substances against untenuous, all this stuff. And so while we have a scientist kind of explaining this very rigorously, we have someone singing. And, if you expand the idea of spirit, of course, to a more generous reading of that word, of course the spirit is speaking all the time in art and through us all the time. So she's kind of showing the paucity of how he's describing it, how it's missing the point of the word of spirit. And there's other moments like that too, little things like that are teased out.
Yeah, I did have a moment, I think the other day, where I was walking somewhere and I got spooked by something, and then I remembered the line. I couldn't have heard a ghost, because Leonardo says that ghosts don't have the ability to make noise.
Yes, and he says, and if they assumed a body, still they could not penetrate or enter where the doors are closed. He's like, if it has a body, it can't go through walls. If it doesn't have a body, it can't speak. So he was making a kind of an anti-occult argument.
Yes, I was very reassured, actually. So the other element in your work that that is really beautiful and actually creates a whole other dimension to our experience as an audience is the music.
Yes. The music is by Michael Bodine and Leonardo. There's a tiny little thing, and I don't think I say it in my program note, and I wish, but you can only say so much. So Leonardo, of course, was also a musician and invented some instruments, and in the notebooks, there's this musical pun, so stay with me. So you know how the notes have names like do, re, fa, so. Well, if you arrange those in certain ways, you can make Italian words very easily. So he makes a musical pun through the notes, and it's amore, re, sol, la, mi, fa, mi, ra, re, la, so, mi, fa, si, le, ci, ta. And then you can sing that on the notes that they are. And what it means is, so beautifully, love alone makes me remember. Love alone makes me alert. So it's very beautiful, and we just suddenly sing it out of nowhere. And there's another, anytime anyone's singing, the lyrics are Leonardo. He wrote a little song, or maybe it's just a little passage. Movement will cease before we are weary of being useful. I am never weary of being useful. And then there's a couple more lines, one of which I altered a little bit to match with something else. And then in the music, we ourselves are being a little bit Leonardo-y, because there's a passage that's one of my favorite, how white bodies should be represented, by which he means white objects. And he says, if you see a woman dressed in white in the country, that part of her which is turned to the sun will be tinted a certain way. That part that's turned to the meadow will be tinted a certain way. But there's a tune we have doing that, and it's the notes in it are A, D, D, A, A, D, D, A. And that's Michael Bodine's little pun, because the river Ada, A, D, D, A, is what ran beside, I think, the town Vinci, where he grew up. So we have our own little Easter eggs in there, which are like way, way below the surface. And there's other little things like that too.
Yeah.
Which, even though they're below the level of consciousness for virtually anyone, I still feel that they enrich it. They enrich the dough,
Yeah.
They do.
Oh, yeah. And the other element, which I think is so lovely, because it's not just a technical feature of any show in the theater, but it particularly in one of the speeches is about light.
Yes. Light is, I believe, even more powerful in our art, than music, because it's on the unconscious level. We're pretty attuned to when we're being manipulated by music. We've grown up with that, and we're both moved by it and aware that we're being moved by it, right? But light is working on a kind of unconscious level. And my lighting designer, TJ, this was the second show we did together, and we've done almost every show together since, including at the Metropolitan Opera and everywhere. And there are something like 500 light cues in our 90-minute show, but they're not flashing all around. You know what I mean? A lot of them are very slow and subtle. But Da Vinci was extremely interested in light and how it worked, and optics, and the light on faces. And there's one actor in particular who has the lion's share of the passages about light and what it does, both to the face and to our perception and all of that. But yeah, I think the light in the show is extraordinary. And there's one moment where we kind of recreate a painting, Madonna of the Rocks. And then we just sit with it while there's some music, and TJ lights it from 3 different directions. That's all that happens. But you see how kind of changeable it is, how different it looks under the different lights, what one brings out, what the other brings out. I say in theater that light doesn't reveal the image, light makes the image. It controls what we see and shapes what we see to a huge extent, So yeah, TJ and I have been all over the world together and done so many shows. He's very important. We did Metamorphoses,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to me, Mary, that I because I had such a visceral reaction to all the work that you've that I've seen of yours that you were just brilliant from the get-go. But I'm sure that a lot of this stuff you obviously accumulated over the years of working in different venues with different artists, collaborators, etc. But back when you did this,
Yeah.
it was really just you.
Yeah, I was really young, but I will say a word now about Frank Galati, who died a couple weeks ago. I might get emotional. He was a very, very great American director, and he was my professor at Northwestern, and then when I became a professor, we were co-teachers for years. And he did a show, without which I think he did this show before I did, I'm 99.999% certain, before I did Leonardo, called She Always Said Pablo. And it was a collection of writings by Gertrude Stein, and kind of blended with images by Picasso, and then also this that opera, Four Saints in Three Acts, or Three Acts, whatever it's called, the Virgil Johnson opera. And it was vignettes and abstracted and just blossom after blossom of sort of beautiful thing. And I don't think this could exist, had I not seen that, somehow this would exist. So Frank was a huge influence on me. And then actually the world of dance, I saw a Peter Brook adaptation. I saw the Mahabharata in Paris when I was a kid, and or 22 or something. Just one episode of it. And that, I think, sort of it was permitting of adapting these great, huge texts, you know what I mean? These huge, epic texts in very simple little way. And another influence, I also, when I was pretty young, saw Pina Bausch. And the kind of emotional quality, profound emotional quality, out of, abstractions, not narrative, non-narrative. I think that was influential on me too. And then I also say, my dad was a physicist, and he was not he was a physicist in the 40s, but thank God he was not good enough. And as his colleagues from other campuses disappeared, and no one actually even knew where they were, he was kind of left to run his department. And thank God, thank God he wasn't at Los Alamos. I'm so happy he wasn't good enough, But I'll also say that there are passages I literally have made changes this week, trying to get Leonardo's thoughts on optics and perspective clearer and clearer, because I actually think he's not quite right, and yet we say it with all of this conviction. So if you're listening to it and you go that doesn't sound right, just know, it might not be, but we're nonetheless demonstrating his theory, right?
Yeah. So adaptation is clearly, as the kids say, your jam.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you've also worked with you've done Our Town, you've done some more sort of classical texts.
I did Wonderful Town, not Our Town. Oh. I haven't done Our Town.
Is it not here?
No.
Wonderful Town.
Wonderful
My
Town.
mistake. Wonderful Town,
Love
which is a
Our
musical.
Town. Yes, it is a musical.
Yes, which is also actually quite a traditional musical in some ways.
Yes, it is. Well, so what about the two sisters? It's not the three sailors. It's the two sisters.
Oh.
My sister Eileen, Ruth and Eileen. Yeah, in New York.
And you've done Guys and Dolls.
I did do Guys and Dolls.
I mean, when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's got to be cool Guys and Dolls.
No, it was just, I hope, a really, really good one. When I do a play that's already written, I do think sometimes people think coming expecting to be, something different, but I only do texts but it's actually quite traditional. I only do texts that I really love for the thing that they are. And so I just did I went through a spate of doing a lot of classic American musicals because I felt I had some showbiz to learn from those guys. There's just real showbiz savvy going on in there. I mean, honestly, Guys and Dolls is just, and it's an adaptation too. Importantly, it's an adaptation that exceeds its source material, Runyon's short stories. It exceeds them and cuts them in a really super smart way. So I was hoping to learn some things and also to relax a little, and because I felt you're kind of on third base already when you decide to do Guys and Dolls or Music Man. It's yours to to ruin if they. I mean, what I mean. It's gonna work unless you get in the way, and I loved doing those, but they're not particular. Like you wouldn't. I mean, I think they're actually quite pretty, beautiful, and I hope super well acted and really clear, and I get all the laughs. But they're not. They're conventional. They're not. I'm not deconstructing them. You know what I mean? Like, I like them. That's why I did them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What would you want to do that you haven't done yet?
There's a couple texts kicking around in my head. One is this crazy Jacobean play, which would have to be, like, normally I consider the word adaptation to apply to something that wasn't written to be a play, made into a play, not it was a play and you edit it. People love to do that with Chekhov for some reason. He's so done that with. But in any case, there's a Jacobean play that if you performed it full length, I think it'd be like 5 hours. So it would need like some very serious cutting, but I find it really crazy and interesting. So that's one. It's a Middleton play. And there was another old text I wanted to do for a long time, and now someone actually has done it. So I don't know that I will be. And I have some other, there's something I'm going to be doing at the Goodman. It's not announced yet. Hopefully next year that I'm extremely excited about.
Ooh.
Yeah, but
Oh, that's cool.
It's maybe not even going to happen. But I mean, it's really expensive and big, and I want to do it in the small theater. So it's financially ruinous, but
exactly what the American theater needs right now.
Right now. While we're on the crest of this wave.
That's right. But we can talk about that project at some point, Mary.
All right.
We have about 10 minutes, so I would like to open it up to a couple questions. Yes, sir.
So if Leonardo da Vinci today, would you consider him autistic?
Oh, let me repeat this question for those who couldn't hear. His question was, would you consider, if Leonardo da Vinci existed today, could he be someone with autism?
I have a friend with an autistic son who is always trying to convince me of that fact. And I think that someone recently wrote an essay about it, actually. I don't know enough about autism, and the spectrum is so huge. My own instinct is to not, I'm going to use the word pathologize it, to make it neurological, I guess. My instinct is to not do that. And maybe that's just a selfish desire to make that kind of consciousness accessible to everyone, which I sort of feel like it is, this awakeness and aliveness. I mean, I don't want to say any stupid cliches about autism, but he didn't have certain problems that might be associated with that. He was actually quite social. He was a good dinner guest, and people wanted him over, and he functioned quite, well. And then also his interests were extremely broad. He wasn't fixed on one, even if you were to call science an interest, there's also art that was just as big an interest. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Creation of the sfumato and also his use of synesthesia, were you consciously sort of aware of that when you were creating this, or did it just sort of organically happen?
Well, sfumato is, and synesthesia I know less about. Sfumato is a type of, it's a technique in painting where, and this is a kind of way that you can authenticate a Leonardo painting, is he didn't outline anything. He didn't draw the lines. The colors always blend. And if you look up of close-ups like of the mouth on the paintings, and it's this way in life, like it's an almost atomic level observation that he says there are no lines, only shadows, that things are blent, and that technique is called sfumato. I will tell you this, that the background, there's a kind of scenic background through a window in the set, and it's taken from the backdrop of Mona Lisa over her right or left shoulder. And I was furious at the painting of it at the Goodman because it was very hard lines that they made. And I was like, that is exactly not Leonardo. But it was kind of how the little, you give them something this big, to to copy. And then that got a little bit remedied here, but it's still a little, I'm going to use the word cartoonish, not derogatorily, because that is a term of painting. That is a term in painting. You draw the cartoon before you do the painting. But yeah, I was drawn to a lot of the passages about observation of light and shadow, but it wasn't conscious, like I must feature this. But yes, in the painting, I was very aware of it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, I'm Alita Barthel, and you were actually my TA years ago at Northwestern. And when you called the beach
Yes, I did.
with Martha Lake.
Yes, I did.
And I remember to this day, light and sound just enveloping, and also seeing that early production.
I remember your name. I do. The beach was the very first, how do I say it? Like full length. It was only an hour, 45 minutes, but performance I ever made. And it was with at the time, Martha Levy, my great friend and colleague, who then ran Steppenwolf Theater for many years in Chicago and has since passed. But it was completely a performance arty sort of piece. And I still haven't, I don't know if you remember this, there's one part of the performance where I ran from side to side of the theater and hit the wall. I still have the injury from that, so I do. I'll get sore there, yeah.
What artists do for their
What
art.
we do. Yeah,
Yes.
well, thank you for remembering the beach. It's important to me, yeah. Yes?
I was just wondering what else might have inspired you to help you with this project through film or other plays that were done?
Well, that one of Frank's was important. She always said Pablo, I think. Not really any film. When I work on something, I go very, very deep into the source text. I like kind of tune out, everything else. I just sort of go as, concentratedly into primary text as I can. There's been a lot of Leonardo scholarship since I first made this, even discoveries of certain pages. And, Bill Gates, right after I made the first one, Bill Gates bought a codex and toured it, the Treatise on Flight, and there's been another one. But there was this Walter Isaacson biography that came out just a few years ago. So I read that in preparation for this. And there's a couple new lines. There's a line we tried to put in, which I just love so much. But the rhythm that we have, like it's so tight that when we kind of took this detour to add this line, it didn't work. But you know what that line is? It's thought to be one of the last. The notebooks they're just pieces of paper with tons of things on them. That's what I'm trying to imitate in the show, like simultaneous, the face of an angel, mathematical formula, shopping list, like all on the same page. I'm trying to do that on the stage sometimes. But this was just like a stray phrase, and it said, "The soup is getting cold." But that's really, to me, at the end of his life, that's a very poignant phrase, that the intellect is cooling, the heart, the mind, that's cooling. It's past due a little bit. And we sort of added it towards the end, but it's so tight what we're doing there anyway that we ended up taking it out. Like the actor, I was like, he just can't get there and then get back to what he has to do. So, but there's a couple, there's an extra list, a to-do list that's from that biography.
Wow.
Yeah.
So my mind is a little blown right now because you just said something that I didn't realize, which was that you were trying to create sort of what's actually physically on the notebooks themselves, which is like multiple things.
Yeah, I didn't say that, did I? Yeah, that is a big part of it.
I mean, I've seen it now 3 times, so every time I see something new because it's so layered, and now it makes sense.
Yeah.
that he would have the to-do list up here and a sketch down here and then some scientific theory down here.
So sometimes we do have multiple things happening that are meant to be sort of striking off each other, but it is a little dense sometimes. Like I confess, I have a whole lot of thoughts about this scene that I don't know if anyone has any, connection to whatsoever. But yes, that's what's notable about the notebooks is, beautiful sketch of a flower, anatomy, literally shopping list. And then another thread I haven't mentioned is that it's so touching to me is this relationship to his companion Salai, who was nothing but trouble. And the Walter Isaacson book had a line that some contemporary, this is what I loved, which I didn't have access to, was contemporary. I'd read the biography by what's his name, the guy who did Lives of Painters, the Italian, 100 years after Leonardo's death. But there's I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, contemporary writing, and some contemporary of Leonardo's wrote, "We had our Leonardo over tonight, but he came with the insufferable Salai." And yet, it's a lifelong relationship. Salai came to him as a 10-year-old, as his model, and then it grew into something else. But he was with him for something like 52 years until Leonardo's death. He inherited the Mona Lisa. So it had and the little strands of that relationship that turn up in the notebooks are so great.
Is Salai the model for John the Baptist?
They think that sometimes, and there's other things they think he's the model of, and I don't really remember.
Okay.
And he was a, kind of second-rate painter himself as well.
So fascinating.
Yeah, in the studio.
Well, Mary, I know these folks would probably love to ask you more questions, but they also have a show to go to.
Yes, and I do too.
So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank
And
you.
Mary,
Enjoy
thank you
the show if you
so,
haven't seen it.
so much
Thank you very much
for joining us.
Thanks for coming to the theater.